January 1st, 1947, New Year's Day. Most people were nursing hangovers. Bill Chapman was working. He was in his mid-20s, a brakeman for Canadian Pacific Railway. That morning, he climbed into the caboose of Locomotive number 3512 for what should have been a routine trip across Slocan Lake in British Columbia. By sunrise, the locomotive would be at the bottom of the lake, settling on the bottom more than 700 feet down. And Bill Chapman would be one of the lucky ones who made it off alive. This is the story of how an entire train disappeared into one of Canada's deepest lakes and stayed there for 75 years. Slocan Lake sits in the Selkirk Mountains of British Columbia. It's nearly 25 miles long. In some places, it drops to 978 feet deep. The water is glacial, cold enough to kill you in minutes. In 1947, there was no bridge across the lake, no tunnel underneath. If Canadian Pacific Railway wanted to move trains from one side to the other, they used barges. 2 barges pulled by a tugboat. The trains would roll onto the barges at Rosebery, cross the lake, and roll off at Slocan City. Simple. They had done it hundreds of times. On December 31st, 1946, locomotive number 3512 finished its work run. The crew loaded the train onto the barges around midnight. The wooden barge carried the locomotive, the coal tender, a snowplow, and the caboose. The crew climbed into the caboose to sleep. Bill Chapman was the youngest. The others included the engineer, the fireman, the conductor, and another brakeman. They bedded down for the crossing. The tugboat captain wouldn't leave right away. The lake was too rough. Waves, wind. He waited until conditions improved. Hours passed. Everything seemed fine at first. The tugboat pulled. The barges followed. The crew slept in the caboose. Then one of the tugboat's deckhands went outside to shovel snow off the barge. He noticed the back of the wooden barge was riding low, too low. Water was coming over the sides, splashing onto the deck, and freezing instantly in the January cold. The barge was taking on water. Deckhand ran to tell the captain. The captain knew they had a problem. If the barge kept listing, it would drag the tugboat under. Everyone would die. He sent word to the train crew. Move the locomotive forward, shift the weight, balance the barge. But there was a problem. The locomotive's fire had gone out during the night. No fire meant no steam. No steam meant the locomotive could not move. The captain came back to the caboose. His message was simple. Get out. Now. The barge is going to sink. The conductor went first. He jumped from the listing barge to the tugboat, several feet out across open water, in the dark, in January, over a lake cold enough to kill him in minutes. He made it. Bill Chapman jumped next, then the others. One by one, the crew abandoned the caboose and made it to the tugboat, but the barge kept sinking. The weight of the locomotive was pulling it down. The cable connecting the barge to the tugboat was still attached. If they did not cut it, the tugboat would go down too. The captain grabbed an axe, one swing. The cable snapped. The wooden barge tilted to a 45-degree angle. The locomotive, tender, snowplow, and caboose slid off into Slocan Lake. Bill Chapman remembered the noise, breaking wood, cracking posts, metal grinding, and then the water. Massive splashes, bubbles everywhere, waves rolling across the lake, and then silence. Locomotive number 3512 was gone, settling deep on the lake bed. The crew made it to Slocan City on the tugboat. They were alive, but they'd lost everything. The locomotive, the caboose, the snowplow, all of it at the bottom of one of Canada's deepest lakes. And there was another problem. A Greyhound bus had been driving along the lake road that morning. Passengers saw the barge sink. They saw the train go into the water, but in the dark, they could not see anyone moving. When the bus reached Nelson, one of the passengers called Canadian Pacific Railway. Their message was grim. No survivors. Bill Chapman's wife got the call. Her husband was dead. Drowned in Slocan Lake. Except he was not. He was alive, cold, shaken, but alive. It took hours before the railway straightened out the confusion, hours before the families found out their men had survived. But locomotive number 3512 did not survive. When it hit the lake bed, the locomotive broke apart. The boiler separated from the frame, and the rest of the running gear lies twisted in a depression in the silt. The caboose landed upright. The tender landed upright. The snowplow stuck into the mud at a steep angle. But the locomotive itself, destroyed on impact. For 75 years, nobody knew exactly where it was. The lake was too deep. The technology did not exist. Divers could not reach it. Over the decades, the story turned into a local legend. People argued about where it had gone down and how deep it really was. In 2020, a diver named Colton Wilk decided to find it. He assembled a team. Commercial divers, ROV operators, and sonar technicians. They studied old records and interviewed locals. Then they discovered something incredible. Bill Chapman was still alive. By then, Chapman was in his late 90s, almost a century old, living in Penticton. He was the last surviving crew member. Wilkie went to see him. Bill told him everything, including where the barge had been, what the weather was like, how the locomotive could not move, and where he thought it went down. The dive team spent days searching the lake, battling weather, equipment failures, and false readings. They covered miles of lake bottom with sonar, finding old barges, debris, and boulders, but no locomotive. On the final day, they found it. The wreck lay more than 700 feet down, right where Bill said it would be. The ROV cameras captured everything. The red caboose sat upright, Canadian Pacific painted on the side. Inside the caboose, the ROV lights picked out the furniture and fittings still in place, like a frozen moment from 1947. The coal tender sat upright. The numbers 3512 still visible in yellow paint. The snowplow lay buried at an angle. And the locomotive. The locomotive lay upside down on the bottom, partly buried in the silt. The cold water had preserved the wreck. The caboose looked almost pristine, covered in silt but intact. When Bill Chapman saw the footage again, as a man nearly 100 years old, he watched the screen as the ROV panned across the wreck. The caboose he'd slept in, the locomotive he'd worked on, the train he'd barely escaped. He didn't say much. What does someone say when they're confronted with the machine that almost killed them? When someone realizes how close they came to being down there with it, the moment rarely leaves them with words. The lake is still too deep for recovery. The locomotive is too heavy, too broken, too buried. Raising it would be hugely complex and extremely expensive, so it stays where it fell, deep on the lake bed, in water cold enough to preserve it for 75 years. Locomotive number 3512 pulled freight through British Columbia for decades, hauled timber, moved coal, did the work that built a nation. But on January 1st, 1947, it made its last trip. Not across mountains, not through valleys, straight down, into the darkest part of Slocan Lake. Bill Chapman lived to an old age. He saw the locomotive again. 75 years later, deep on the lake bed, right where he left it. Most days, trains run on schedule, crews go home, nobody drowns. But January 1st, 1947 was not most days, and for locomotive number 3512, there was no going home, just down, into the cold, into the dark, into the water that became its final stop.